Australia's coal companies throw out big profits and even bigger share price gains just as the use of solar in the national market catches up. A new report says Australia's skilled migration system needs an overhaul, and Qantas boss Alan Joyce apologises to frequent flyers. It's Monday, the 22nd of August, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Now, before we say anything else, 22nd of the 8th, 22. What a cracking date.
Why?
22822.
It feels a lot like you're clutching at straws here, Sean. It's just
okay. Move on.
It's kind of like a palindrome, I suppose. 22822, but
Maybe 220822 or something. Really?
No. It's you're going to have to work a lot harder to impress me with the date than that one. I'm sorry, Sean. Something that will impress you, though. How about this for a review that we've received on Apple Podcasts? And we love getting reviews. It's just nice to hear what people think about Fear and Greed.
Mostly it is. Yes, I agree.
As long as it's nice. And it says, dial in. Great to have a quality podcast, just focusing on business and investment news and insights from an Australian point of view. Much appreciated and recommended. Just kind of ticks all the boxes, doesn't it?
Fantastic. Thank you, whoever sent that in. Very generous.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if you want to leave one of those, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. And of course, give us a 5-star rating there on Spotify. Basically, whichever platform you're using, it's always possible to give us a positive review. So thank you very much for doing that. Immediately after the show today, Sean, one of our favourite regular guests, Matthew Kidman from Centennial Asset Management, having a chat to him all about the earnings season.
That's right. Matthew's pretty upbeat about the earnings season. He thinks it's gone okay so far. Of course, this week is a massive week for earnings coming up. But we have a chat to Matthew about how he thinks things have gone so far.
Yeah, it's a good one. It is coming up a bit later on. But the main story this morning, Australian coal companies are hitting multi-decade highs and printing huge profits, just as solar surpasses coal in terms of generation into the national electricity market. Timing.
On Friday, at lunchtime, solar supplied more generation than coal into the national electricity market for the first time ever. There's been some difficult circumstances, coal-fired power plants breaking down, supply shortages. So it didn't last long. It lasted about 35 minutes around lunchtime, but it just showed how quickly renewables are catching fossil fuels. Renewables provide about 1/3 of the electricity supply in Australia's grid at the moment, according to The Australian. The Labor government wants renewables to provide 82% of the electricity supply in Australia's grid by 2030. So this is going on. Renewables, particularly solar, is supplying so much more energy. And at the same time, the coal companies are having the best time they've had in years. Thermal coal prices have risen again, and Whitehaven, New Hope and Yancoal's share prices are at record highs or decade highs. In fact, those companies are 3 of the top 4 performers on the ASX over the past year. Incredible.
Yeah, that is incredible, and they're making plenty of money.
In fact, on Friday, Yancoal posted a record half-year profit of $1.7 billion with a B, $1.7 billion. This is a company that a year ago posted a $129 million loss for the same period. It now has no debt, having been swamped in red ink 18 months ago. Whitehaven's numbers come out this week. They will be huge. Incredible what's happening to these coal companies.
Yeah, some big numbers, but I suppose that the question really is, Sean, and you mentioned there with the amount of power being generated by solar passing coal for the first time, how long is this going to last?
It's a good question. The shift to renewables is inevitable. It will speed up, not slow down, as technology improves. But Yancoal Chief Executive David Moult made a good point on Friday. He said Europe's newfound appreciation for Australian thermal coal is likely to be permanent because Russia's invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated that countries need to diversify their coal suppliers. While Japan and South Korea remain the main destinations of Australian thermal coal, 9% of sales are now going to Europe. All in all, it is a golden age for energy companies, whether you're a fossil fuel company or a renewable group.
Yeah, sure is. How did the local market finish on Friday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up 2 points to 7,114 points, while the energy and materials companies did well. The banks and healthcare stocks fell back. Among the large caps, ANZ and Goodman Group fell 2%. CSL and National Australia Bank were down around 1.5%, and Commonwealth Bank dropped 1%. Woodside Energy closed up 4%, while Rio Tinto was 1% higher. Best on the day, though, was Santos, which rose more than 6% after a bunch of upgrades following last week's earnings announcement and also a jump in oil prices. I mentioned it earlier on, it's a very big week for earnings. Coles, Woolworths, Wesfarmers, Qantas, South32, Centre, and of course Whitehaven Coal, all reporting. It's going to be great fun.
And how about international markets? What's happening?
Wall Street was lower over the weekend, with the S&P 500 falling more than 1% and the tech-heavy Nasdaq dropping about 2%. European stocks were also lower. All in all, the steam in the equity rally just ran out a bit over the last week or so. Away from equities, gold was down over the weekend, so too Brent crude. The Aussie dollar is buying under 69 US cents, and Bitcoin went for a tumble over the weekend, dropping 9% to around 21,000 US dollars a unit.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, a new report has found that Australia's skilled migration system is needlessly complex and needs to be revamped if we want to attract workers.
The Deloitte Access Economics report released yesterday said Australia's labour market was a standout success during the COVID-19 pandemic, as evidenced by the jobless rate falling to a 50-year low of 3.4%, or at least a 48-year low of 3.4% last month. Also positive was the labour force participation rate, which now hovers around a record high of 66.4%. But the support from the government now needs to pass over to the private sector. To do that, Australia needs to cut red tape and show the world that it's open for business so people, migrants, can get into our workforce and get a job quickly. That's all according to Deloitte.
Now, we love a good housing market update, Sean. With just one weekend left before we get to spring, auction volumes have picked up and clearance rates lifted across the country.
Yes, it was almost like spring had arrived early, I'd say. The proportion of homes sold hit a 12-week high over the weekend based on preliminary CoreLogic figures. The combined capital city clearance rate was 62.6%. Anecdotally, it's unique or high-quality properties that are doing best. It's really interesting that we have had doom and gloom non-stop for about 6 months now on the housing market. And just as we head to spring, things just look a little bit better. Not saying that prices won't fall further, but those people who have been predicting kind of 7 to 10% falls in house prices rather than 20% falls in house prices must right now be thinking, let's hope spring does okay.
Yeah. Now, we spent a lot of last week, Sean, talking about this next story, and it just keeps on developing, doesn't it? Prime Minister Anthony Albanese may hold an investigation into whether former Prime Minister Scott Morrison's decision to secretly appoint himself into 5 ministry portfolios overturned any constitutional conventions.
Anthony Albanese said there is no suggestion that it's illegal, but said reforms may be needed to prevent it occurring again. Over the past week, it emerged, of course, that then Prime Minister Scott Morrison became Shadow Minister for 5 portfolios: Treasury, Finance, Health Resources and Home Affairs. Yesterday, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that Governor-General David Hurley's diary makes no mention of the 5 times he handed the extra ministerial powers to Scott Morrison. Not really sure where to go on this one. It is old news, but clearly there's a lot of political points to be scored on this one. Anthony Albanese also yesterday said a COVID-19 Royal Commission was in the works, though he provided no timing. And when asked about the biggest challenges he's faced since getting into the top job, he nominated the economy, geopolitics, and the cost of living.
They're fairly significant challenges, aren't they? The top 3, really.
Yeah, definitely. That's what he's been spending all his time on, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Qantas boss Alan Joyce, we mentioned this one at the top of the show, he has sent a video to frequent flyers apologising for flight cancellations, for delays and lost baggage, and offering a $50 discount for some flights.
He said Qantas had experienced a 50% jump in sick leave due to COVID-19 and influenza, but the airliner's performance still wasn't good enough. Mr. Joyce said Qantas has hired 1,500 people since April and will keep hiring. Flight schedules have also been adjusted, and most of Qantas's 14 million frequent flyers will be gifted a $50 travel credit. They go to anyone that lives in Australia or New Zealand. Federal government data for July shows Qantas's on-time performance rate was just over 50% for arrivals and departures, and more than 6% of flights were cancelled in the month. That is a really poor performance, and obviously Alan Joyce thinks that they've got some work, at least some PR work, to make things better.
Sean, the federal government has released a discussion paper on the strategy to boost uptake of electric vehicles, and the main goal of it here really is how to make EVs cheaper.
That's right. The government wants to remove fringe benefits tax and import tariffs on electric vehicles, which will cut prices by around $5,000, according to Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen. He said higher prices and long delivery times were slowing take-up, making Australia a dumping ground for expensive and outdated models. In fact, fewer than 10 models are available in Australia for under $60,000. But other industry experts said supply was a bigger issue than price and more needed to be done. There's also a push to introduce fuel efficiency standards that would force manufacturers to produce more EVs.
Australia's biggest gold miner, Newcrest, has outlined a 16% drop in pre-tax profit, but is upbeat about the future, saying production will lift by 8% this financial year.
And that was enough to send Newcrest's share price up nearly 4%. Newcrest has had 3 years in a row of declining production. Last year it mined around 2 million ounces of gold. That declining production has always been a drag on its share price, but the upgrade on Friday was very much welcomed by investors. Newcrest has been spending on growth options after its flagship mine in Cadia, which is in the central west of New South Wales near Orange, passed its peak production point. For example, the company recently purchased Canada's Brucejack mine for about $2.8 billion US. It says that it will be able to turn around production and produce more. One thing about Newcrest, it's an incredibly efficient miner, so the cost of extracting those ounces of gold is relatively low compared to some of its competitors.
Sean, AGL Energy's benchmark full-year profit has fallen nearly 60% on the back of coal plant outages and volatile wholesale prices.
The country's largest power generator said while its net profit was up sharply from last year's loss, underlying profit sank to $225 million. The breakdown in a unit at its Loy Yang coal-powered generators, which is still being repaired, hit the bottom line. AGL, like its competitor Origin Energy, didn't give guidance on future earnings, citing too much uncertainty in the market. Of course, billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes is the largest shareholder in AGL. On Friday, its share price fell nearly 4%.
Hearing implant group Cochlear said sales have rebounded to pre-COVID-19 levels, although in some economies, including Australia and the UK, they remain depressed by surgery deferrals.
Yes, the group's underlying profit jumped 18%, sending its share price up 2.4% on Friday. CEO Doug Howard said while the past 2.5 years have been tough due to restrictions on surgeries and COVID, there is increased awareness of hearing loss as a result of mask wearing. This is one of my favourite stories of COVID, the fact that people suddenly have realised they don't hear as well because they can't lip read. Interesting. Yeah. Anyway, as a result, sales, that's good news for Cochlear, obviously. Sales were up. The company also said it will invest $100 million to $150 million over 4 to 5 years in cloud-based technology to improve efficiency and agility. Quite a few companies this earnings season have outlined big tech spending, particularly in the cloud.
Sean, this is an interesting one. One of the few remaining infrastructure companies listed on the ASX, APA Group, has been caught up in a payroll error over multiple years that's cost the company $32 million.
That's right. We've seen this with the retailers and some of those organisations with huge workforces. Well, now APA has been caught up. It apologised to staff late last week after an independent review identified payment errors to employees over a 7-year period relating to superannuation and interest payments under 7 enterprise agreements. APA said the errors occurred due to incorrect interpretation of the agreements. APA has commenced a process to remediate the errors for those affected.
And there's plenty of other results around that are worth a mention too, Sean.
Yes, let me just run through quickly. TPG Telecom's share price fell 13% on Friday after Telco missed earnings estimates in its half-year results. It also reported softer than expected growth in revenue per user. Poultry group Ingham's outlined a big drop in profit on the back of much higher feed, ingredient and transport costs. Its share price tumbled 9%. Property giant Stockland's net profit rose 25%, but its share price fell back a bit. And Accent Group, the retailer behind Hype DC, Platypus, Skechers and Athlete's Foot, said profit was much lower and blamed lockdown disruptions. But it was upbeat about its outlook and its share price jumped 11%.
All right, moving on to overseas news now. And activity in the Russia-Ukraine war is escalating with new blasts in Russian-annexed Crimea and fears that Moscow is targeting nuclear power stations.
A Russian strike in the south of Ukraine occurred close to a nuclear power station and wounded 12 civilians. Such strikes have raised greater concerns of a major nuclear accident. It just seems that we've been a bit lucky so far. Meanwhile, in Crimea, which was annexed in 2014 by Russia, Ukraine is making headway. A drone struck a building near the headquarters of Russia's Black Sea Fleet over the weekend. It seems that a new strategy from Ukraine of attacks on logistical targets in Russian-held territory seem to be making some headway. It's a very interesting point, that war.
Okay, now up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview, and today you're speaking to Matthew Kidman from Centennial Asset Management.
Anyone who's an investor, anyone who's interested in earnings season should listen. Matthew's great. He has a great way of putting it all into English, and he tells us some of the companies he likes and some of the ones he doesn't like.
Absolutely. And of course, we're not an investment podcast, and we certainly recommend that you get professional advice before making any investment decisions, but it is certainly good to hear what Matthew thinks about earnings season. And also, while you're listening, why don't you queue up the week ahead with our resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas, who not so much happening this week, but it's worth hearing his take on last week.
Yeah, he goes into great depth about where he thinks the economy's up to. Also, we have a quick chat about the Jobs Summit, which is coming up in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, it's a good one. They are both coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Sean, while we've been talking, it's dawned on me, is the reason why you love the date so much because it's 220822, and if you add up all the twos, they make the 8 in the middle?
Absolutely. That's it. I knew there was something. Subconsciously, I knew that, but definitely not consciously.
Goodness me. All right. Thank you, Sean. Have a great day.
Thank you, Michael. You too.
It's Monday, the 22nd of August, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.